The crew aboard the starship Valor had never encountered anything like this. A faint, almost inaudible signal had reached their sensors. It wasn't like any of the usual space noises, this one was different. It hummed, almost like a voice, soft but clear enough to be detected by their advanced equipment. For days, they tried to figure out what it was, but no matter how hard they tried, the signal remained a mystery. Captain Blake sat in the command chair, staring at the holographic display. His fingers hovered over the controls, unsure of what to make of the strange message. It didn't look like a typical distress call. There were no patterns, no familiar codes that could be decrypted with the usual methods. This was something new, something that felt almost alive. "Captain, you need to see this," Lieutenant Sarah Hart called from her station. She was the communications officer, and she had been working tirelessly to decode the signal. Blake turned his chair toward her. "What did you find, Lieutenant?" "It's not like anything we've encountered before," she replied, her voice tinged with a mix of awe and fear. "It's not a message. It's a call." The word hung in the air. A call. A call from someone, or something, out there in the darkness of space. Blake leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the screen. The signal was repeating every few minutes, growing stronger with each cycle. The crew could feel the weight of it, pressing down on them. "We're too far from any known colonies," Blake muttered, mostly to himself. Who could be sending this? As the signal grew louder, something unexpected happened. The ship's systems started to react. Lights flickered, alarms buzzed, and the engines briefly powered down before restarting with a surge of energy. The crew exchanged nervous glances. "Captain, we need to stop this," Hart said, her voice urgent. "If this is a trap, if it's a signal that someone is trying to lead us into an ambush, we need to back off before it's too late." Blake hesitated. He understood the risks. They were alone in deep space, far from any help, and an unknown signal could very well be a lure to something dangerous. But curiosity was something Blake couldn't ignore. The call was unlike anything humanity had ever experienced. It was impossible to turn away. "We don't know what it is yet," Blake said, his voice steady despite the tension building in the room. "We need to find out." With a flick of his wrist, Blake activated the ship's external sensors, pushing them to their limits. He wanted to know everything about the signal, every fragment of information he could pull from it. As the signal's frequency shifted, a strange series of numbers appeared on the screen, numbers that didn't belong to any human language. They were like a code, but it was not one they could break. The crew worked through the night, but it was Lieutenant Hart who found the key. She noticed that the numbers weren't just random, they had a rhythm, a pattern. It was a language, but one that no human had ever heard. This is a message," Hart whispered, her voice trembling. "It's not from any known species. It's old. Very old." Blake stood up abruptly. "Old?" She nodded. "It's a distress signal, Captain. And it's not just a call for help. It's a warning." The words echoed in Blake's mind. A warning. The realization hit him like a punch to the stomach. Whoever, or whatever, had sent this message was waiting for something. And that something was likely to come soon. "We need to inform Earth," Hart said, now fully realizing the gravity of their situation. "This could be the first contact we've been waiting for. But we're not prepared for what's coming next." Blake was quiet for a moment. He glanced at the crew, all of them unsure of what to do next. They had discovered something that could change everything, but in doing so, they might have unleashed something much darker. The signal repeated again, louder than ever before. Something was on its way. And now, there was no turning back. The Valor was silent, except for the hum of the engines and the occasional beeping from the control panels. Captain Blake sat in the command chair, his eyes glued to the holographic display in front of him. The signal had not stopped repeating, growing stronger with every passing minute. It was no longer just a message, it was a call, an undeniable summons. The crew was on edge, unsure whether to feel excitement or fear. This could be humanity's greatest discovery, or it could be their undoing. Blake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being drawn into something far bigger than themselves. Lieutenant Hart, her fingers flying over the control panel, continued working to decode the strange signal. "Captain, there's something more," she said, her voice shaking. "It's not just a distress call. It's not even a simple message. It's an invitation." Blake's heart skipped a beat. "An invitation?" "Yeah," Hart replied, swallowing hard. "The message repeats a phrase over and over. It's a name. It keeps saying, Aruan. The name felt heavy in the air. It wasn't like any human name Blake had ever heard. "Aruan," Blake whispered. "Who, or what, was Aruan?" "I don't know," Hart said, her voice trembling. "But I think it's important. Whoever, or whatever, Aruan is, they wanted us to hear this." Blake leaned forward, his mind racing. He glanced at the rest of the crew, all of whom were now gathered around, watching the screen as the strange signal grew louder. "How much longer until we reach the source of the signal?" he asked. "It's close," Hart answered, tapping the controls. "We'll be in range in an hour." The tension was palpable as the crew prepared for whatever was coming next. The unknown stretched out before them, dark and silent like the vast emptiness of space itself. But just as Blake was about to give the order to continue, something strange happened. The ship's sensors started picking up something else, something large, moving fast. "Captain," the sensor officer said, his voice tense. "There's something out there. Something massive. It's heading straight for us." Blake's heart raced. "What is it?" "It's not registering as a known ship," the officer said. "It's too big. It's—" Before he could finish, the ship shuddered. The lights flickered, and the engines sputtered, their power surging uncontrollably. The Valor shook violently as though something was trying to break through the hull. Blake's command center was filled with alarms, and the crew scrambled to keep everything under control. "What the hell is going on?" Blake shouted. "It's the signal," Hart yelled back. "It's interacting with our systems." Then, as suddenly as it had started, everything went quiet. The shaking stopped. The light steadied. But in the silence, a new voice, this one real, not a signal, echoed throughout the ship. "Human vessel," the voice said, its tone cold and commanding. "You have awakened the sleeper." The voice was unmistakably alien, its presence as chilling as the depths of space. Everyone froze. Blake's stomach twisted as he realized what this meant. Who are you?" Blake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I am Aruan," the voice responded. "I have waited for this moment for millennia. Now you have summoned me." The entire crew was paralyzed. The truth was dawning on them slowly, but Blake understood what it meant. They hadn't just uncovered a long-forgotten relic of some ancient civilization, they had awakened it. Aruan was not a name. It was a being, a force that had been dormant for ages, lying in wait for someone to trigger its awakening. "I don't know what you want," Blake said, trying to keep his voice steady. "But you need to explain, what is happening?" Aruan's voice seemed to fill every corner of the ship, like a whisper carried on the wind. "I have waited in the shadows. You, humans, have always been too afraid to venture too far. But you, now, have made the mistake of coming too close. And now, the Koraz are coming." The word Koraz sent a chill through the crew. Blake had heard of them, of course, every human had. The Koraz were a warlike species, ruthless and known for their destruction across the galaxy. They had been thought to be a myth, a cautionary tale whispered about by the older generation. But now, here was Aruan, confirming that they were real, and worse, they were coming. Blake felt his heart drop into his stomach. "What do the Koraz want with us?" "They want the same thing they have always wanted," Aruan replied. Power. Conquest. But you, humans, are different. You have awakened me. You have called me from my slumber. And now, I will help you fight them. The room was silent for a long time. The crew exchanged glances, uncertain whether to believe what they were hearing. A centuries-old being claiming to help them fight a warlike species. It felt insane. But Blake knew one thing for sure, the Koraz were real, and they were coming. They had no choice but to listen to a ruin. He stood up, his resolve hardening. Prepare for battle, he ordered. We're not just going to survive this. We're going to fight. As the crew sprang into action, Blake couldn't help but feel a sense of dread wash over him. They were about to face an enemy unlike anything they had ever known. And with Aruan's help, they might stand a chance. But what price would they pay for that help? And could humanity really survive what was coming next? The Valor hurtled through the vast emptiness of space, its crew on high alert. Captain Blake had never felt the weight of leadership more than now. Aruan's warning still echoed in his mind. The Koraz were coming. A force more terrifying than anything humanity had ever faced. And now, in their desperate attempt to survive, they had an ancient being at their side. But with that came questions that Blake knew he had no answers for. The ship's systems were constantly buzzing with updates as the crew worked around the clock to prepare for what was to come. The mission was clear: unite the scattered human colonies, form an alliance, and prepare for battle. But it was easier said than done. Blake knew that humanity's greatest weakness had always been its divisions. They had fought amongst themselves for centuries, and now, in the face of a common enemy, Blake wasn't sure if those divisions could be overcome. We need to start contacting the colonies, Lieutenant Hart said, her voice tense as she studied the communication screens. I'll start with the biggest ones, Mars, Europa, the Moon. If they won't listen to reason, we may not have time to warn them. Blake nodded grimly. The Koraz weren't a force that could be stopped by diplomacy, but they had to try. Let's not waste any time. Every second counts. But as Hart reached out to the colonies, Blake found himself wondering if it was even possible to unite the human race in time. The governments of Earth and the colonies had always been at odds, each one focused on its own survival, its own interests. Was there any hope of cooperation when the stakes were so high? As the message began to spread across the colonies, Blake prepared for the worst. They had no idea how the Koraz would respond to the humans' first move. But what Blake didn't expect was how quickly things began to fall apart. We have a problem, Hart said after receiving a reply from Mars. They're refusing to cooperate. They think this is a trap. They won't join the alliance. Blake clenched his fists. Why? Why would they think that now, when we're on the brink of extinction? It's the Koraz, Hart explained. Some people believe we're provoking them by assembling an army. They think the Koraz might see it as an act of war, and they want nothing to do with it. Blake was furious, but he knew the truth. The fear was understandable. The Koraz were brutal conquerors, and humanity had never faced a threat like them before. But the refusal to act could cost them everything. I'll handle Mars myself, Blake said, determination in his voice. I'll make them understand. A few days later, Blake found himself on the surface of Mars, standing before the Martian Senate. The meeting was tense, the atmosphere thick with suspicion. The politicians, dressed in their formal attire, eyed him with a mix of distrust and curiosity. Blake stood tall, trying to hide the nervousness gnawing at him. Captain Blake, the Senate leader, a woman named Juno, said, her voice cold. We've received your message, but we refuse to be dragged into this, whatever it is you think is happening. The Koraz are nothing but a myth, and we will not sacrifice our resources on a wild goose chase. Blake's jaw tightened. With all due respect, we're not asking for resources, Senator. We're asking for your help to save humanity. The Koraz are real. And they're coming. We've heard that story before, Juno replied sharply. 100 years ago, it was the Tathar. Then the Zorith. You humans always seem to think you're on the edge of extinction. Blake's patience was wearing thin, but he knew he had to stay calm. The future of Earth and its colonies depended on this. This is different. The Koraz are unlike anything we've faced. They've been waiting for a long time, and they're about to make their move. The room fell silent. Blake could see the doubt in the eyes of the senators, but there was also something else. Fear. You're asking us to risk everything based on the word of an alien entity? Juno asked, raising an eyebrow. Blake nodded. Yes. But not just any alien. Aruan. The being who warned us. We have a chance to fight back, but only if we unite. We need every ship, every colony, every soldier we can get. The Koraz will wipe us all out if we don't act together. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was deafening, as if the weight of Blake's words had stunned them all into disbelief. Then, slowly, Juno stood up. Tell me about this. Aruan, she said. If this is the truth, we'll help you. But if this is some kind of trap. Blake didn't let her finish. It's no trap, Senator. The Koraz will be here within weeks. Please, we don't have time to waste. After what seemed like an eternity, Juno finally nodded. Very well. We'll support you. For now. Blake exhaled, relief flooding his chest. But he knew the fight wasn't over. Mars had agreed to join, but Europa, the Moon, and other colonies still refused. And even within the human alliance, there were factions that feared the truth, that humanity might not be strong enough to survive the coming war. As Blake returned to the Valor, his mind raced. He had one colony's support, but that was only the beginning. The future of humanity was uncertain. The Koraz were coming, and no one could predict what would happen next. The alliance was fragile. After the hesitant support of Mars, the other colonies, Europa, the Moon, and a few scattered outer world outposts, still refused to join the fight against the Koraz. Fear and distrust ran deep. While Earth's leaders rallied together to create a semblance of unity, Blake knew it wasn't enough. The Koraz were coming, and they didn't have the luxury of time. The Valor was now the flagship of humanity's last stand. With the limited support they had, Blake ordered the ship's weapons systems to be tested, the crew to prepare for battle, and the fleet, however small it was, to be assembled. Aruan had promised that humanity had a chance if they could hold their ground, but Blake wasn't so sure. The ancient entity might be able to help them, but there were no guarantees. It had been a week since the last message from Aruan. They knew the Koraz fleet was somewhere out there, in the cold, dark reaches of space, but no one knew exactly where. The tension was unbearable, and Blake could feel it in his bones. He walked the corridors of the Valor, trying to reassure his crew, but every time he met their eyes, the uncertainty was written across their faces. Then, one fateful day, the long-range sensors picked up a signal, an anomaly, moving fast. The ship's computer flagged it as the Koraz Warfleet, just as Aruan had predicted. The fleet was massive, larger than anything humanity had ever encountered. It was unlike the sleek, efficient ships of Earth. The Koraz ships were dark, angular, and built for destruction. They're here, Hart's voice crackled over the comms. I'm reading a massive fleet, Captain. They're not even hiding their approach. Blake's grip tightened around the armrest of his chair. Prepare the fleet. It's time. The Valor was joined by a handful of Earth's remaining ships, a ragtag assortment of battered vessels barely capable of space travel, but they were all that humanity had. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Are you sure we can hold them off? Lieutenant Hart asked, her voice tinged with fear. We don't have a choice, Blake replied, his face hardening. We fight or we die. As the Koraz fleet approached, the Valor engaged its engines and moved into position, along with the other ships in their tiny, makeshift fleet. The space around them seemed to stretch on forever, an endless void that swallowed every bit of light. But even in the dark, Blake could see the approaching shadows of the Koraz ships. They were enormous, each one the size of a city, covered in sharp, jagged edges like the teeth of a monster. The battle began suddenly. The first shots rang out, as the Koraz ships opened fire without warning. Energy beams pierced through the silence of space, striking Earth's ships with a force that shook the Valor to its core. The human fleet returned fire, but the Koraz ships were far more advanced, their weapons far more powerful. For every shot that hit its target, the humans lost a ship. Blake felt his heart race as he watched the destruction unfold on the main display. The human ships were being destroyed one by one. The crew on the Valor worked quickly, firing their weapons, evading attacks, and doing everything they could to hold their ground. But the Koraz were relentless. Their ships came at the human fleet like wolves closing in on prey. "Captain!" Hart's voice screamed through the comms. "The main ship, the Koraz flagship, it's locking onto our position." Blake didn't hesitate. "All ships, retreat. Fall back to the last known jump point." It was a desperate move. The human fleet wasn't nearly fast enough to escape, and the Koraz were too close. Blake knew the retreat would fail. There was no safe place to run anymore. As the Valor turned to make its escape, a massive Koraz vessel launched a direct attack, sending a wave of energy pulses that slammed into the Valor, tearing through the hull. The ship shuddered violently, throwing the crew to the floor. Alarms blared, and the ship's systems flickered. "Damage report." Blake barked. "Shields at 40%, Captain," Hart responded, struggling to maintain her grip on her console. "Engines are holding, but we won't last much longer." The Koraz flagship loomed large in the distance, its weapons primed and ready. The humans couldn't outrun it. But then, something unexpected happened. The strange, familiar voice of Aruan came through the ship's communication system. "You are not alone," Aruan's voice echoed. "The Koraz will not stop until you are destroyed. But you can change the tide. Listen to me." Blake's head snapped toward the communication console. "What do you mean?" he demanded. Aruan didn't respond in words, but the ship's sensors began to shift. A hidden weapon, something they had never seen before, activated within the Valor systems. The ship's energy reading spiked, and Blake could feel the ship's power grow. "Captain," Hart said, her eyes wide with disbelief. "The ship's systems, they're responding to Aruan. We have something new." Blake's heart pounded as he realized what Aruan had done. In that moment, the Valor wasn't just a ship, it was a weapon. The ship's energy surged, and a massive beam of light erupted from its core, striking the Koraz flagship with devastating force. The Koraz flagship shuddered, its shields failing. The massive warship was not destroyed, but it was crippled, its ability to fight neutralized. The Koraz fleet hesitated, momentarily stunned by the unexpected attack. For the first time in the battle, the humans had gained the upper hand. "Continue firing," Blake commanded. "We have them on the ropes." The humans, using the new weapon Aruan had unlocked, pressed their advantage. The tide of the battle had turned. The Koraz were not invincible. But Blake knew this victory was only temporary. The war was far from over. As the battle raged on, Blake's mind raced. They had won this fight, but how many more would they have to face? The Koraz were just one enemy, and the universe was full of untold threats. But for now, humanity had a chance. A chance to survive. The Valor and the remaining human ships had fought valiantly, but the battle was far from over. The Koraz flagship was crippled, but it wasn't destroyed. Even in their weakened state, the Koraz fleet still had the numbers, and their ferocity was unmatched. Blake knew that this moment, this very second, might be humanity's final opportunity to end this war. Captain Blake stood at the command center of the Valor, his eyes fixed on the chaos unfolding before him. The Koraz ships were regrouping, their massive forms circling like predators, waiting to strike. The human fleet, exhausted and battered, had no time to rest. Blake's hands gripped the armrest of his chair, his knuckles turning white. He could feel the weight of every life aboard the ship, every person depending on him. But even in the face of certain death, Blake refused to surrender. "Aruan," Blake said quietly, as if speaking to the ancient force that had been guiding them. "What now? We've done everything we can. We've pushed back, but the Koraz are still here. What else do we have left?" The room was filled with the hum of active systems, the nervous energy of the crew palpable. It was Lieutenant Hart who answered his silent question, her voice cutting through the tension. "Captain, the Koraz, they've changed tactics. They're moving in closer. It's not just an attack, they're trying to trap us." Blake's heart skipped a beat. "A trap?" "Yes," Hart said, her fingers flying across the console. "They're forming a blockade around us. They're positioning their ships in a perfect circle, locking us in. If we don't make a move soon, we'll be surrounded." The truth sank in like a stone. The Koraz had learned from their mistakes. They weren't just going to destroy the human fleet, they were going to ensure it couldn't escape, couldn't fight back. The Valor was running out of options. "Captain," Hart said again, her voice strained. "There's something else. I'm getting a signal, this time from the Koraz flagship." Blake turned sharply toward her. "What is it?" "It's not a communication. It's a countdown," she replied. "A countdown to something they're preparing to launch." Blake's eyes widened. "What do you mean, a countdown?" Hart's face went pale as the numbers began flashing on the screen. The countdown was nearing its final moments. The Koraz were preparing to unleash their deadliest weapon. Blake could only imagine what it might be, an all-out barrage, something that could wipe out every ship in its path. "Get me a direct connection with the Koraz flagship," Blake ordered. Moments later, a harsh, mechanical voice echoed through the Valor's communications system. "This is the Koraz warlord. You have delayed us, human. But it is of no matter. Our final weapon is in place. The end for your species is at hand." The message sent a cold shiver down Blake's spine. The Koraz weren't just threatening to destroy the Valor, they were planning something far worse. The time for diplomacy, for mercy, had long passed. They weren't simply fighting a battle. They were fighting for survival itself. "Captain, we don't have much time," Hart said, urgency in her voice. "We can't survive another attack like the last one. We need to act now." Blake stood up, his mind racing. The odds were impossible. The Koraz had them cornered, their ultimate weapon on the verge of being unleashed. And yet, in the midst of this desperation, Blake knew that one final act of bravery could tip the balance. He didn't have a choice. The Valor was humanity's last hope, and if they were going to stand a chance, he would have to make a sacrifice. "Aruan," Blake whispered, his voice barely audible, "show me the way." Suddenly, the ship's systems surged to life again. The ancient entity's presence flooded the room, its ethereal voice resonating in Blake's mind. "Captain Blake, you have done well. The Koraz will not be defeated through conventional means. But there is another way." Blake listened intently, his pulse quickening. "Tell me what to do." Aruan's response was simple, yet filled with an undeniable power. "You must destroy the source. The Koraz weapon is bound to their flagship. If you strike it directly, their fleet will crumble." Blake knew what he had to do. It was the only chance they had left. "Lieutenant Hart," Blake said, his voice steady, "prepare the Valor for a direct assault. We're going to their flagship." "But Captain, the blockade, if we try to break through." "There is no time for hesitation," Blake cut in. "This is it. If we don't do this now, humanity will fall. We must take the fight directly to them." With the crew moving quickly, the Valor surged forward, its remaining engines pushing the ship toward the heart of the Koraz fleet. As they broke through the blockade, the Koraz ships opened fire, but Blake remained focused, eyes locked on the Koraz flagship. It loomed ahead, its dark, jagged silhouette like a death sentence. With one final burst of energy, the Valor launched a devastating strike at the core of the Koraz flagship. The resulting explosion was blinding. For a moment, the entire universe seemed to stand still. The Koraz flagship shuddered, then exploded into a million pieces. The shockwave sent ripples through the Koraz fleet, causing chaos and confusion. The once mighty armada faltered, losing cohesion as their command ship was destroyed. The human fleet, battered but not broken, seized the opportunity. With the Koraz leadership decimated, the remaining ships were easier to target. The humans fought with everything they had, pushing the Koraz back. Blake knew the battle wasn't over, but they had won a crucial victory. The Koraz were reeling, and for the first time, humanity had a chance. As the smoke cleared, Blake stood tall, breathing heavily. He had led his people to victory, at least for now. But the war was not over. The universe was vast, and there would be more battles to fight. More enemies to face. But for today, humanity had won. And they would survive.